All right, so this is called the Afterburn. So if you have comments or questions about today's teaching, you're welcome to line up over here.
Okay, so I just want to be clear. You talked about what it says being in exile, so that would be where we need to be. Could we apply it this way, where we need to have a specific change but aren't able to see the change we needed, so leaving us where we are in life, so we're like exiled away?
Well, all of us are living in what's called the exile because we're not in the land, we're not in cohesive national covenant. Okay, individually we're coming into covenant, and so we're still in that exiled status. But while we're exiled, all of us individually and then as a group are trying to make the Shuva. We're trying to return to where we were supposed to be. And some of you never were there, and now you're trying to get there. Others of us were there, and now we're trying to return. But the idea as a scattered people is that we're all returning. Okay, we're trying to return things back to the way they were intended from the beginning.
And then you talked about trust. To me, I think we don't trust because we feel we need to have an input on what is to happen. And without that input, we feel we give up control, just what a lot of us fear doing.
Amen. Look, I didn't mention it so much during the submission part of this, but you know what? It's all about control. And we're very, very, very afraid at times of giving up control or allowing somebody else to have control. Look, the first time you get in that car with your child driving and they have control of the wheel, it's a little scary. Not necessarily because they're a bad driver, and some of them may be very good the first time you let them do that, but it's still scary to allow them to have the control. Then they move out of the house and they're living on their own, and again, you no longer have control, and that's scary too. And then you have your own life and you're trying to give up that control to somebody else. Ladies, when you get married, you have to give up some of that control to your husband. That's very scary. And then we come into this where all of us have to give up control to the King, to the Creator. And we then have an issue because how do I trust that? It's very hard to trust something if you haven't had an experience where you've done this and it worked out well, and you say, oh, I trusted and it worked out well, because we don't have a lot of those experiences. We maybe have a few here and there, but a lot of them go badly because we're trusting human beings. And human beings ultimately are not very trustworthy at times. And so we have challenges there. Anyway, thank you, Steve.
Okay, I had others, but one more I want to share, and then if I'll let others. And I want to ask, how true is this for until the one needing to change in a certain area, that one won't change until they recognize the need for the change?
Beautifully said. Okay? I mean, that's in essence a lot of what I said in the middle of this teaching today was, you have to examine yourself and you have to see that need, and you have to, I didn't say it this way, so I like the way that Steve said it, you have to want to change. I work with a lot of people in counseling, and I can't help a lot of them because they don't want to change. They want help, but they don't want to change. And until they want it, it's not going to happen. And some of you have that trouble with your teenagers as they're growing, and you're thinking that they're going to be heading in some wrong directions. They're going to go in those wrong directions until they recognize that they don't want to go there. And so your children are going to do drugs if that's what they want. They're going to have sex before marriage if that's what they want. They're going to do all kinds of things if that's what they want. It's only when they get to a place where they don't want it that they won't do it. And you will not be able to have any effect on that. All you can do is get them to hear you, so maybe that voice will come to their memory, like it says in the scripture, right? That then you will remember these words, and maybe at that moment they might remember your words and make a good choice. But they're not going to make that choice unless they want to. Do you understand that? They're not going to do it because you said so. Now, when they were littler, they did. But when they're older teenagers and they're about to leave and be independent, they're not going to do anything they don't want to do just because you said so. And the same thing works with the Creator in you. You're not going to do it until you want to. You're not going to submit to Him until you want to. He can't make you do that. Now, He can allow life to be pretty tough until you do and maybe get your attention, but you're still not going to do it until you want to do it. And that's a really good point. I like the way you worded that.
I'm going to try to word this the best I can because I misplaced my Rabbi Nuggets notebook, so I wasn't able to write down my thoughts clearly. You, in the beginning of the sermon, you touched about like arguments and stuff like that, or because you know me, like when I feel like I don't communicate away and I want to try to go back and explain myself. Since you pop into our house so much, being anointed and appointed you are, I wish you would have been able to stop me in the conversation that I was having yesterday. But my question with that is, why is it wrong not to try to explain yourself? Because that's where I'm getting hung up on.
Okay, it's not wrong to explain yourself. Okay, I mean, sometimes somebody may need to understand why you did something and what happened, etc. There's a difference between explaining yourself and explaining yourself to defend yourself, even if you're not actually under any kind of attack, but you might think you are, or explaining yourself so that you get the other person to make a change in their decision or a change in their approach. See, it's more than just explaining yourself, because we don't just explain ourselves without some other agenda attached to it. And I'm not saying it's a bad agenda necessarily, but we explain ourselves for a reason. And the reason for the explanation is important to whether or not it may or may not be appropriate in how you do it, okay?
So if I felt like the person was, had a wrong impression of what I was thinking and I was trying to have them change their opinion by explaining it, that would be wrong then?
No. If you think that somebody has misunderstood something you did, and you only want them to understand what you did, not trying to get them to think you were right or not, but just understand that they didn't understand what you did correctly, then you can say, look, I have a sense that you don't understand what was really motivating me, what I did or why I did it. I'd like an opportunity to explain that. Just so you know what I was really motivated with. Because maybe they thought you had a motivation for A or B, and that wasn't really why you were doing it or something. All right, so, but you want to approach that not in the middle of an argument about whether it should have been done or not, because then you're still arguing the case of why you disagreed with what they did. And so, be careful how that plays into the mix. But at some point you may want to say, look, this isn't an argument. This has nothing to do with whether I agreed with what you did or not, or how this all played out. I just want you to hear from me that I don't think you understood why I did what I did. That doesn't make it right or wrong. It's just I want to explain why I actually did that.
Okay.
Okay?
And then my other thing is...
Put the mic by your mouth.
Oh, sorry. I'm lost in my thoughts right now. Because you really hit on a lot of things today, and when you're talking about trust and rebellion, it's hard to, and I'm working on it, not as fast as I want to, or you probably want me to as well, but part of when I was growing up, being on the streets and stuff, rebellion was a way of staying alive. Because, cops and with the drug dealers and stuff like this, how do you, because I'm trying to raise my kids in a different way, how do you, one, change yourself in that and I'm not wording it the way I want to.
Okay, well, hold on.
I think you get what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and well, rebellion wasn't the way of life. You were doing you were living a life that was your life the way you understood it, and you were doing self-preservation in the context of that life, okay? Everything you were doing was not in line with what Yahweh said, but you weren't rebelling. You didn't know what Yahweh said. He hadn't opened up so that wasn't rebellion to him. Now, you did a lot of things that were illegal, and so those things were rebellion against the government and the laws of the land. But you have to remember, you were in a world that's what you understood. That was the life that you were raised into, okay, because you actually were raised into that, as opposed to someone choosing it later. And so your choices on the street were those that you understood in that context to be for self-preservation, okay? You were trying to stay out of jail and alive. And so those are things that you were doing while still living a life that was the only life you knew. So that's different than rebellion. I don't want you to think that that was rebellion necessarily, okay? All right.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I really appreciate this greatly. I feel like even on Yom Kippur, the things that you said about forgiveness, forgiving other people and everything, and then all of this really tied to an incident that I had this past week. I went to the bank to do, put money in the bank, and I got really angry at the man at the bank. And I'm just going to kind of leave it at that, just to say I was really, he's trying to help me, but, as you said today, I went in with one expectation of how this was going to go. I was frustrated because it wasn't going to go the way I wanted it to go. And so I was really rude and disrespectful and some other things to him. And,
shame on you.
I know, I was ashamed. I really was ashamed, but it was bad. It was really bad. And so I got out of the bank and I got in the car and I said, wow, you really are ashamed of yourself, I hope. I said, because none of that, the way you talk to this man would be what, the Father would want. And I said, so now I have violated my declaration that I made to, bring honor to his authority and the authority of Yeshua. So it gave me a lot of thoughts. But did I go right back in the bank and apologize to him? No, I did not. I stewed about it a few hours, shared it with a couple people at work, called somebody else from here, and I was like, not that I was right. I wasn't right, but it was really good for me to do all this so I could really think of all the ramifications of how I treated this person who was doing really, he didn't get upset. He just kept trying to offer to help me, and I just wasn't even going to think he was going to help me.
Right.
In the end, he really would have been helpful if I'd have shut my mouth and listened to him, but I didn't. But I did go back, after our service on Thursday, I went back yesterday, but I already had it in my mind because when you spoke Thursday, I was already troubled, and I knew what it was, is the Father removed his presence from me because of my behavior. So it was interesting because every verse you covered today just kind of went through this, and everything that came into my mind is, when I'm a child, we kind of grew up in the same time frame because I'm a couple years younger than you. If I did that when I was a child, which I did, my mother would have said, Amy Marie, march yourself right back over here, and you're going to apologize to this person, and you don't treat people like that.
Right.
So I had that in my mind, and thankfully the man was at the bank yesterday. I could talk to him. But I thought, this is a big deal, because nobody would have known what happened, and I could have just not even went back to that bank.
Of course.
He would have known, I would have known. Yahweh knows, of course. But what I did, and I want you to tell me right or wrong in my thinking, in my mind, obviously I did break my declaration I made at the mikvah, because that was very dishonoring and to the Father and to the Son. But my behavior brought shame upon the community, because another thought I had was, what if these people actually turn on MTOI and say, oh, there's that woman, she came in and ripped my head off for no reason, and look at her, she's dancing, and she gets up and says all this stuff. Well, shoot, I know a whole different side of here that you people don't know, So I thought, here I brought shame to everybody, but, you guys wouldn't have known it, but I did. And
you never know how that plays out. You never know how that plays out. When you do something and you don't know who's going to know. I remember being at a job that I was working, and I had gotten to work, and a guy came in through the employee entrance, and he was all upset, and he was concerned, and he was running late for a job interview. And I guess he'd cut some people off on his way in, trying to get there because he was running late, not realizing that one of the people he cut off was the guy he was going to work for. Oops. And he was asking me what he could do to fix that. I said, you made that bed. Okay? I don't know what he's going to do or not do, but, And when he cut him off, or how it all worked out, I'm sure that he told him he was number one with a different finger and all kinds of other wonderful things that were not going to go well in his job interview. Okay? So when we do things, you never know when you may run into that person again, or where that person may come into play. And so don't always think that, something that happens is disconnected from everything. There's really no way to know when something, and it may be years down the line. Years. Even when you do a good thing, it may be years down the line. I've told this story many times, how when I was first in ministry, we were doing a conference, And we had tapes at the time, like audio tapes. And a guy came by the booth in the marketplace that they had at this big conference, and was wanting to get us some tapes, and we sold them for cheap, like $1 a tape or whatever we had, just to get them out there, just for the cost of the tapes. And the person was asking about different teachings, and he had picked up 4 or 5 tapes, and I said, well, let me see what you've got. And I said, well, actually, to understand that, you need this one, and you need this one, and you need this one. He said, but I don't want to spend all that. I said, fine, take it anyway. And I gave him a dozen extra tapes or whatever it was that he didn't want to spend money on. And that was the last I would have thought of it. I didn't know who this person was. Go forward to when I'm coming back from my 7-year journey, and I'm looking for a place to teach, to start again in ministry. And I talked to my good friend, Dominic at the time, who's passed away, but I talked to him and said, I'm trying to really find a place to speak. He said, well, let me go talk to the congregation leader over here where I am in towards Savannah, Georgia. And he called me back and he said, absolutely no problem. He says, he remembered you when you gave him all those tapes. Think about that. That was 10 years earlier, and I didn't remember him. I didn't remember even doing it. I know that I do that kind of thing and just to give everything away as best I can. Now, of course, we would never even sell anything. If we were at a booth, we'd just be giving it away. But, that little nice gesture that I'd done, that kindness, opened up the door I needed 10 years later. I mean, just go think about it. So you don't know when you do something kind. You also don't know when it might blow up in your face down the road. So it's always helpful and good to go back and fix what you can. So anyway, just want to throw that out there. So just to give you more examples of that really can play out, but it works in both directions. A kindness you do to a stranger. I didn't know this person. I didn't know who he was at all. Just some guy came up by the booth. And I didn't, so I just did what I do with everybody. I just said, no, well, you need him, so take him anyway. And he remembered that. That's the only reason he gave me that opening, because he remembered that. All right, go ahead.
Okay, so then when you were speaking today, Deuteronomy 4 actually came into my mind, because I was kind of thinking about this incident and then everything that you were saying. And he starts in 4 about listening to the laws and the right rulings, which, he was teaching them to do so that they could live and go in and possess the land which Yahweh Elohim of your fathers is giving you. So we're doing the same thing. We're hoping to get into the land, the kingdom. And then in verse 6, it says, you shall guard and do them, for this is your wisdom and your understanding before the eyes of the people who hear all these laws, and they shall say, only a wise and understanding people is this great nation. And I thought, everything that you teach us, teaching us to have the character of Yeshua, if we do it, we will be wise people, because we'll have changed our character. We'll have done the work that we need to do by applying and going back and fixing mistakes, making teshuvah, and doing all that. Correct? Yes? Okay.
Yes.
All right. So then I was thinking that's almost the definition of wisdom, right? Is where we take what you teach us, apply it, make the corrections so relationships can either be formed well or restored when transgression has occurred, just as we want to be restored to the Father and be in his kingdom.
Correct. Well said.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
From JK, says, with the lesson of submission in mind, does that apply to the laws and rulings of the nations we dwell in currently, to respectfully submit to the governmental decisions we disagree with?
All right, look, there is a mention of this somewhat where Yeshua talks about render unto Caesar what's Caesar's, and we have Paul talking about in Romans the idea of giving respect to authorities. There is a context to this, though, and then you have to understand Yeshua gives us the context. Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, things that should be Caesar's, and that's appropriate, and you need to treat that with respect. The problem is when whatever Caesar does is going to ask you or force you to break Torah. That's something you can't do. And you also have the opportunity to stand up against if Caesar wants you to do something that's going to hurt you. Actually hurt you. And you then stand up and say, no, I'm not going to do this. It's going to hurt me. Okay? And so that's where the limit is. But generally speaking, we should be submissive to all authority because it's a practice that we should have to demonstrate then also to our King, our Creator, that we are submissive to authority. And so, yes, you need to have respect for the fact that they have authority. You could always choose to live under a different Caesar. There are lots of different countries in the world. Most of them are almost as challenging as any other one, but you can go live anywhere you want. I mean, now it's a little tough to travel, but in general, that's been the case, and most people can move around a little bit. And so you can. I mean, it may have hoops you got to jump through to do it, and paperwork and all kinds of other things, and wait, and takes time, but you can choose. But you have to recognize that the authorities of where you live are still authorities. And we need to treat them with respect, even if we don't like and disagree with what they're saying, provided what they're saying is not more than just inconvenient. Inconvenience is not enough of a reason to have disrespect. When they're actually threatening you and your life, etc., or even your livelihood, when they're shutting things down to the point where you can't make a living and your business can't stay open, then you may want to voice a dissenting voice to say, this is not good. I can't function under this. But you can still do that respectfully through the formats that they allow for you to go ahead and give your dissenting voice and saying, I think this is not working. I think this is not appropriate. You are causing harm to me. All right? There are platforms for that where you can do that. Okay, if nothing else, you could strike. You can just say, I'm not going to, patronize different things if that's what I have to do to make the point that, we'll shut things down and you just don't go to work or whatever it is. Those are civil disobedience that is basically done in a respectful way, but it's one of those options you have. Okay? We do have a right to protest, at least in this country. And you have a very wide variety of things that are considered protest. But again, you do it respectfully, hopefully, not disrespectfully, because then nobody pays any attention to you when you do it disrespectfully. And that's where, a lot of the people that have been protesting over the last few years here, they've completely stepped on any possible message they would have by the way they did it. How is anybody going to care about your message when you're looting and rioting and burning down buildings? That's not respectful, and it's not going to get anybody to actually listen to your message. It's just going to think you're a bunch of thugs. And they'd be right, because that's thug behavior. And so whether you had an appropriate message originally, nobody cares. Now all they care about is that you're destroying things. And you could have a very powerful message without doing that. Look at what Gandhi was able to do. He didn't destroy anything. Went on a hunger fast, and he caused people to protest in peaceful ways, and look at the powerful effect that it had. And so there are lots of things you can do that are civil, and they're somewhat called disobedience, but there are ways for you to do it in a way that's respectful. All right, so hopefully that makes some sense.
Okay, from Anna Uden, says question, in connection with Jeremiah 6:13, it goes back up. So question, Matthew 5:19, can you please explain this verse in connection with Jeremiah 6:13?
Okay, Matthew 5:19, I know where that's going already. All right. So 5:19 says, whoever breaks the least of these commands and teaches men so shall be called the least in the kingdom. And we're comparing that to Jeremiah what? 6:13?
6:13, yes, sir.
Okay. So Jeremiah 6:13 is trying to say it matters not your status in life, whether you are the poorest person or the wealthiest. So we're saying that this is not a class-related deal. This is not a status of any form. Whatever you think is the least or the greatest, everybody in between, in other words, everybody is doing what they're doing to gain some benefit. That's what Jeremiah is talking about. Now, in Matthew 5:19, okay, remember, Jeremiah is still saying there are those that you would think are least in status on some way, and those you might think are great in some way. We generally look at people and we categorize them in some way. Not that we should, we just do. By default, we look at people, okay? They generally had a class system, a caste system, and so there were the wealthy and there were the poor. There was the royalty, and then there was everybody else, and there was the priests, and then there was there was all kinds of statuses based on your role in the community. So now we're in Matthew 5:19. It says, whoever then breaks one of the least of these commands and teaches men so shall be called least in the reign of the heavens. But whoever does and teaches them, he shall be called great. So now he's telling you, as far as what those who are in the kingdom will be thinking of those who do these things, they will think that the status of least and greatest is connected to how you taught this. If you taught people to do, you would be thought of as someone who was a great person. If you taught people to do not, to break the commandments, you would be considered the least of people. Now, I don't believe that this is referring at all to talking about people that are actually in the kingdom when it talks about the least. The ones who are teaching people to break it will not be in the kingdom. But there may be a discussion about, hey, you remember so-and-so? Well, yeah, he's one of the least of people. That's why he's not here, because he taught people to break Torah. And so-and-so over there, he's here and he's great because he taught people to keep it. And so he's trying to give people an understanding of an appropriate use of ranking people from least to great. You're in the least category if you're teaching people to break. You're in the great category if you're teaching people to do. Now, let's go to the teaching people to do and take that in a little bit more clarity. You do not all have the responsibility to teach to do by words, by websites, by writing it out, by books, or by anything else. You teach to do by doing. You demonstrate it through your actions. Some people, like myself, have a role to teach to do with words or in some other way. But not all of you have that role. You must be trained for that role, called to that role, and anointed to that role. But all of us can teach through our actions. We teach because what you say has not even remotely the effect of what you do. Because as the old saying goes, what you do speaks so loudly I can't hear what you're saying. All right? So like the parent smoking the cigarette, telling their child not to smoke cigarettes is not getting the message across very clearly.
From Jersey Girl, says, I don't come from the church, so how can one submit to an earthly teacher without question when we're to be Bereans, not follow man, and work out our own walk?
Okay, this is why you need a teacher. You just confuse three things completely, okay? And I'm not picking on the person. You don't understand what the Bereans were being referred to doing. You don't understand what walking out your own walk is about, which is Philippians 2:12. And the idea of trusting man. Listen to the teaching called Learn and Teach the Torah, which is a teaching that explains why we need Torah teachers, all right? Where the scripture actually tells us we're supposed to have them. Of course, Ephesians 4 tells us that when Paul talks about the fivefold ministry, that we need these people. The Bereans took what was being taught and went back and looked at the book to see if what was being taught was actually in the book. Okay, that's being Berean. That doesn't mean you're self-taught. It means that you're going to actually go check. A lot of you are here because one day after your bubble got popped, you were sitting there in church and you had your Bible open and the preacher said blah, 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 and you looked at your book and said, wait a minute, that's not what it says. Anybody have that experience? So you were being Berean. You didn't just sit there with your mouth open like a baby bird and be fed and let the mother bird put anything in your mouth. You looked it up and said, wait a minute, it doesn't say that. And I've seen some astounding things come out of some pastors' mouths. And not what you may be thinking. I watched a pastor, I won't name who it was, Joel Osteen, and he was making a point while blinking relentlessly. He was making a point. I need to blink as I'm speaking. That's what he does. Just go back and watch. I'm not making this up. And he doesn't blink when he's not speaking. Then all of a sudden as he's speaking, the eyes just continuously are blinking. But the point he was making was actually a valid point. And at that moment, I could think of 7, 10 verses that would make his point beautifully. And he picked the one verse that didn't make his point. I'm like, really? There were so many choices you had that anybody, even you, would have guessed off the top of your head, not deep studying to know these verses. And you picked an obscure verse that really doesn't even say what you said. And nobody knew that. They're all just sitting there going, oh, this is wonderful, whatever. Okay? And you may all be thinking, why were you watching that? Because I watched everybody a little bit in the beginning to find out what they were teaching, so I knew what I'd have to teach you to show you what it's supposed to really be. Because I know you came from a place hearing all of that junk. So a lot of my teachings were how to confront and to clarify the mess they were teaching you. So I would listen to a few minutes of everybody back on a Sunday, back in those days, to hear what the subject matter was, so I'd know what you needed to hear. Because you need to hear the same stuff done correctly, without the confusion and all of the misdirection. And so that's really important that we understand that. But when we're talking about being Berean, you're being Berean when you go and take what I'm saying, and you look in your book and see, does it actually say that? Then the second part was Philippians 2:12, walking out your own salvation. That has nothing to do with teachers per se, but you're going to need a teacher to help you know how to walk, to teach you the Torah. You still have to walk it out yourself, and how you walk it out is still on you. You're responsible for you, and nobody else is responsible for you but you. And we're going to actually read that next week in Ezekiel 18 when we get there. Okay? In a couple of days, that's Sukkot. But you are responsible for you, which, by the way, that still has everything to do with the idea of teshuvah. You'll see how it plays out. Now, that being said, the third part of it was, so being Berean, and then walking out your own salvation, and the third part was teaching ourselves or not needing a teacher. What was it? This is still going into that sort of Christianized idea, or those who come into this thinking, once I have the Ruach teaches me. Okay? Yeah. And if you have any questions, I'm not saying hundreds, just any question about this walk and about Torah, why would you have a question if you didn't need a teacher? You would be able to get the answers without needing to ask the question. But if you feel like you have to ask somebody a question, it's because you don't have the answer and you haven't been able to find it. And so that's the whole point, is he designed this to need teachers, for there to be those to instruct. And that's consistent all the way through the book, okay? All the way from cover to cover, that there needed to be instruction. All right, next question.
Okay, from Mordecai Ben Yah says, Shabbat Shalom, what is rebellion and what is fear?
All right, I think I covered at least the rebellion part already in the teaching, so you may need to go back to the teaching, okay? Rebellion is when you know you shouldn't and you don't care and you do it anyway. Or you know you should and you don't want to and you don't care. Rebellion is because you don't care about the consequences, you don't care about the authority that the person has. You're rebelling against that authority. I'm going to be doing because I want to do it and I don't really care what you have to say about it. That's not the internal struggle when you don't want to do it, but you do it anyway. Because you know what that's like. That's most of your problem, right? It's stuff you know you really don't want to do it, but you keep doing it and you get frustrated with yourself. That's not rebellion. That's the internal struggle between the preferences and the desires and the emotions you have and matching up with him and getting that all under control. Rebellion would be just doing it callously and not caring. I don't care. I'm not afraid of him. I'm not afraid of anything. I'm going to do it on my own thought. I'm right. He's wrong. That's it. Whatever. So you don't care. So you do it. That's out of rebellion. You're not respecting that there's an authority. But when you do stuff, okay, and by the way, when it's rebellion, there's no guilt. See, if you do it and feel bad about it, it wasn't rebellion. It was that internal struggle. If you do it and don't feel bad, that's rebellion. Because now you're not feeling bad because you took authority and chose to do. And so what's there to feel bad about? You were under authority. You're totally in line with the authority you were submitting to, which is you. Okay? So that's a good question for more clarification, because I didn't say that way during the teaching. And then the fear part, what is fear? Listen to the fear of Yahweh teaching. Okay? That is explained in depth and very nicely in that teaching. All right, next.
Okay, from Stephen Wood, how can we keep a clear line between keeping commands and letting our rebellious nature take over when dealing with people that are not in the same walk as us? My offense seems to replace Abba's will.
All right. I said this on Thursday, and I think it was a really important thing. We need to use the tool I gave you Thursday, which is you have to understand, to be successful in living in reality, you have to accept the limited control and influence you have over it. Especially when we're talking about other people. You can only control you. You can't control anything else. You may control children up to a certain age, but you really have very limited control. If you are married, you may have a limited control in the marriage. If you have children, you may have a limited control there. If you have a company, you may have a limited control over the people while they're at your job site. And even then, it's only limited. People still do whatever they want to some degree, right? So you must understand that limit that you have to control. Okay, so the whole rebellion thing and the struggle with, people that are not in this walk, you need to recognize that they are not, I don't want to say this in a way that comes across, they're not your problem. Their walk is not your problem. Their obedience or disobedience to anything is not your problem. Even if it's your family member, it's not your problem. And you have to recognize that limit that you have to control. This is one of the things I'm going to hit hard during Sukkot when we talk about the teenagers. You parents are going to have to understand how much limit you have to how much you can control with your teenagers. All you can do is develop a close enough relationship where they may consider your words seriously, but they're still going to make their own choices. You can't force it. And if you try to force it, you're only going to make it worse because they're going to hide it from you. Then you force them underground. And you don't want to do that. Some of you have already done that, and you know what I'm talking about. You have children that you've already created that problem because you didn't understand that you couldn't control it. Okay? So we have to stop trying to have so much influence over people that are not walking this walk. You've got your plank in your own eye, work on that, and be happy enough with that. Let that be satisfying enough to you. Now, if you're the husband or the father and it's your house and you're trying to have your house be Torah observant, well, then you have to decide to help people understand that there are certain things that are not acceptable in your house. They don't have to personally care about it and not be walking it out. But for example, if it's my house and I'm the only one walking it and my wife and my kids are not in this walk, they need to know that I may choose this, that I'm not allowing them to bring pork in my house. They want to eat pork outside, go ahead. You want to eat shrimp and everything, eat it outside. Don't bring it in my house. I don't want it in my house. That could be my choice. Okay, it's Shabbat. Nobody in the house is doing non-Shabbat things. You want to do non-Shabbat things? Leave the house. If I'm at the house. Now, if I'm leaving the house and I'm going to services somewhere and they're going to behave whatever they want at the house, that's fine. I don't want them disturbing my shalom and my Shabbat. I'm not going to make them observe it. I'm just going to make sure they're not disturbing it. So let's say my wife and I are keeping it and I have a child that's not keeping it, go in your room and be quiet and don't disturb, and I don't care what you do. That's your walk, that's your thing. I'm not going to force you to sit here and watch a teaching or do something that you don't want to do. But I won't allow you to disturb what I'm doing. Okay? Because that's this house. And some of you are thinking, really? I said, really? I will not make my teenage children come down and watch a particular thing or participate in a particular thing, but if that's not what they want to do, they're only going to get resentful and bitter and more angry with me and everything else. And they're not going to look at this in a positive way because they're forced to do it. There's no benefit to that. You don't get it, I know, and you're arguing with me already in your head. But I'm telling you the truth. And you need to just start to consider that I might be telling you the truth. Okay? Now, just like I told you about your kids, I can't make you do anything. I can only ask you to consider what I said, right? And you'll either understand and agree with it or not, or give it a shot and see that it's right. But I can promise you I'm right. And there's some of you who've experienced, you're all shaking your head because you know, either because you've tried it and what I'm saying worked, or you didn't try it and you saw it not work exactly like I told you. And so you already have that t-shirt. There is no benefit to you making anybody see. That's Christianity's nonsense. That's all lies out of the Christian system. You can't make anybody see something. Listen to the Father and the Son teaching, the first couple of parts, where it talks about how they open the eyes and we don't. We do not open anybody's eyes. All right? Not when it comes to spiritual things. That's all on him. The Father reveals the Son reveals the Father, period.
Rabbi, when you were talking about that we get the chance to demonstrate to the Father,
That's okay. This is part of your routine. You always drop your pen when you come up. We're used to it now.
You can
We're used to it.
keep it for me. Otherwise, I'll drop it again.
Yeah.
Yeah, but when you were saying that our Father gives us a chance to demonstrate to Him that we are submitted to Him, and you were saying that we also get to demonstrate Him if we submit to our authority here, right?
Yes.
So it's not. So to me, it was okay. So this is my opportunity to learn, not just to demonstrate Him, but actually to learn, to submit to my husband first, and to you as my rabbi, and whoever else is in my life as an authority.
Correct.
Right.
Look, if you have an employer, if you have a job, you learn how to submit to an authority figure. Submitting to an authority figure is a mindset that you have to have. And that if you don't have that mindset, if you start having an issue with authority, you'll have an issue with all authorities at some point. It doesn't just stay just having a problem with one authority. And so I talk to people all the time, and the more I get to know them, if they have a problem with submission, I'll find out they have the same problem at their job, with their teachers, with any authority that they interact with, that they have a challenge in that area because of whatever drama they went through in their life. So, but just understand that the same thing works in the opposite direction. So if you have a problem with one, you may have a problem with all, but if you can submit to one, you start to learn to submit to all. And it's a practice that you have to demonstrate to show the Father, because more than anything else, you are going to have one overriding requirement in the kingdom: submission to His authority. Okay? All of the other stuff flows out of that you are going to submit to Him, which means that no matter what, no matter how you feel about it, He is going to have that authority. Okay.
Rabbi, when Amy was sharing her testimony, and you were saying that you never know what act of kindness is going to play out later in life, so it made me thinking about how you always teach us, you reap what you sow. Is that the same as you receive what you give?
Well, to some degree. I mean, look, I gave somebody some free tapes, and I got a welcome mat to be able to come and have a microphone to talk at. They're not reciprocal as like the same exact thing. You're going to reap, but not necessarily exactly what you sow, but you're going to reap because you sowed, and you're going to reap something that you need, which may not be what you sowed. It's not like in the name it, claim it guys who say, if you sow money, you get money. No, if you sow by doing something good that you need to do, you'll reap something that you need to reap. And it's not always going to be a one-to-one thing. I mean, sometimes it could be a one-to-one a little bit. If you're more loving and more kind, you may receive more love and more kindness. Okay? That's a thing that actually works reciprocally. But not everything is that way. Okay? I mean, he needed those tapes, I believed, so I gave him what he needed. I needed a microphone to start and relaunch the ministry. I needed a place to start. So he was willing to give me something I needed because I gave him something he needed. All right.
If you allow me 2 things, please. Jeremiah 6:15, when it says, they shall stumble at the time I visit them. Is that what he's talking about, like at the time of basically when what is that time? Like when we die, when we have a trial, when?
No, I mean, it's, when you think about stumbling, I mean, think about when you're doing something you shouldn't do and then an authority figure shows up, okay? And then you're sort of awkwardly trying to scramble to hide whatever you were doing or clean it up or whatever it is, so that the authority figure, he says, you're going to stumble because I'm going to visit you and I'm going to know everything you did. And then that's when things sort of go really bad sideways as you panic, okay?
And then this one, I don't know if you let me know if this is something in counseling, or maybe you can respond to that. I'm thinking maybe other people could benefit from this question. But you were talking about how we can get displeased because we don't understand, what's happening or what's happening in terms of Abba's will in our lives, perhaps. I have somebody who was having a very hard time. Now she's doing better, but she was having a really, really hard time understanding the miscarriage that she had. The miscarriage was I think a day before the baby was supposed to be born. I mean, it was really, really late in the pregnancy. And she was really bitter and she was really angry at God, who she considered God. So we know who Abba is, or at least we think we know because he opened our eyes. But with people who are not in the walk, and they have their own understanding of who their God is, how do you help them have peace with that?
Okay, well, I'd have to talk to you about this separately. But
Okay,
here's the main thing, though. You can't help anybody unless you have the much more specific details of what their unique situation has. I mean, yes, we do have a lot of people that when an adverse thing happens in their life, they may be bitter and blame their creator. But I need to know more about them. If they're Christian, I need to know how to approach them so that I can give them things that they would understand from where they're coming from. If they're just in the world, I'd have to find a way to approach them based on them just being in the world. Okay? Now, in this case, you're saying she started being bitter towards God. All right. Well, if she's Christian, then I can try to help her understand that he causes and allows all things, that there are verses that say time and chance happen to all men. All kinds of adverse things do happen to people that are undesirable. And that doesn't mean that, the causality there. I mean, she may think, well, he did this to me. How could he do this to me and my baby? All right, well, let's first examine whether or not we should really be thinking he did this to you. Why do you think he did it to you? So we have to kind of peel away the layers. Again, how many times have I told you guys this of late, especially in January? I know I've talked to you a lot about this in terms of counseling. Dig underneath. I'm mad at God. Okay, why? He let my baby die. Okay, but why are you mad at him? Because your baby died. Well, why would he do that? So you have to kind of figure out what is causing the anger. Maybe she might be thinking guilt, like maybe I did something and he's punishing me. And so I'm mad at him instead of just owning that. Because I only other thought is to blame myself. And now we have a different problem because some of these people are going to blame themselves. What did I do to lose my baby? And so we have to try to help them through whichever way they're going. Because they're going to either blame where it doesn't belong or own what they shouldn't own necessarily. And we may have to help them emotionally process that. Because a lot of bad things happen to people and they own it when they shouldn't own it. Okay? Something bad happens, especially when you're talking about a miscarriage. I know a lot of women that, it's funny because until my wife had one, nobody talks about it. You don't know that anybody's had one. Then you start talking about it, you find out everybody's had one. I didn't realize just how common that was. And how awful it is every time for everybody. And I know how awful because we lost it. I think we lost two. We weren't sure if one was or not because we lost them both very early, okay? And so one we knew for sure we had gotten told it was a pregnancy, but the baby never, it was like an empty sac type of thing. But anyway, the point is you have these miscarriages. But the first default thing with a lot of people is to blame themselves. What did I do wrong? How did I cause this to happen? My body failed. I'm no good. I couldn't do, a lot of times it goes inward. And when it doesn't, it goes outward. They want to blame something. Sometimes things just happen. That's what Solomon, with all his wisdom, tells us that. Sometimes things just happen. Time and chance happen to everybody. With your question, I'll give you some answers. I guess that'll help a little bit. Miscarriage, okay, especially late-term miscarriage, is often, please don't take this wrong, but often because the body failed to do what it was supposed to do, which is abort early. In other words, recognize that the baby was not viable, and then the body recognizes that often quickly, and that's where miscarriages come from. Okay, a lot of miscarriages is because there was something that went wrong in the development. The body recognizes that and releases, so it doesn't come out in a bad way. Okay, something terribly wrong happened, and so, because remember, when you have all those billions of cells replicating and all the other stuff that happens to go from that little to sperm and an egg to turn into a baby, there's lots of opportunities for things to go sideways. Okay? And sometimes the sideways thing is not horrible enough so that the baby doesn't come out and doesn't end up being functional in some way. Sometimes it's horrible enough that the body understands and just decides, we're not going forward with this. When it happens so late in the term, that could be that it should have happened much earlier, and it's sad that you had to carry the baby for almost a full 9 months only to have that happen, but it is possibly and probably because there's something wrong, that this is the way the body is designed to handle it, okay? And so the body recognizes and does self-aborts, in other words. So now you deciding you want to get rid of something because you just don't want it, but the body has recognized that this is something that probably should end before it goes out into the world. Okay? Now remember, I studied this a lot when we lost ours to try to understand. And it's the body recognizing, and usually early on, so a lot of people have them, don't even realize they have them. It happens way at the beginning. Okay, it happens very early. But now when we went to a group therapy type of thing for like, groups with people that have had miscarriages and lost babies, we felt almost embarrassed to be there because ours didn't go that far. And there were people in there that had lost them like this, like very close to the end. And wow, we couldn't even imagine how much harder that would have been. I mean, it was. And now, of course, we still had our own sadness for losing what would have been, this was before we had our first one. We were so excited to have a baby and we didn't get that to work out the first couple of times. But yet, we couldn't even imagine had it gone a lot further and how horrendous it is to go through that. But I think if you help them understand that it wasn't maybe meant to be a 9th month thing. It just didn't happen earlier when it probably should have. And then it would have been much easier on everybody, okay?
You read a verse that said we will return to Yahweh with all our hearts. And then you reminded us that the heart is the seat of emotion. So when it comes to intense personal prayer, hitbodidut prayer, what role does or should emotion play, and what would be appropriate emotion or inappropriate emotion?
Well, look, hitbodidut is it's the Hebrew for the idea of doing personal prayer that's not pre-written prayer, but mostly it has the idea of being quiet and not necessarily saying a whole lot. And if you can start from a quiet place, you may be able to sort through your emotions to find what you really want to say and where it's coming from and those kind of things. But a lot of the promotion of the people that talk about that style of prayer has more to do with saying nothing and being quiet than saying anything, okay? So, and then you may feel like you want to say something from your heart, like to cry out and say, I want to know you better. I want to help me to understand me better so I can fix me, or whatever it is it's coming from, and not necessarily asking for things. In hitbodidut, you're not necessarily asking for stuff, okay? I want this and I want that and whatever, but you're openly dealing with it's like you're spending time with your father, your best friend, the creator of the universe, and you're spending that time and you're just being very open, okay? All right. This is something that the Breslev Orthodox, are big fans of.
Shabbat Shalom. Just. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
I was wondering, what exactly is bitachon, and does it have any nuances?
Well, bitachon is trust. Okay, it probably has a lot of, nuances to it and everything, but it's the idea of trust. Okay.
Okay, and so when we were talking about trusting the Father, when you were talking about that during the teaching, it caused me to remember a lot of times when I was in the Army, for example. where a decision would be made on a much higher level, like the battalion level, and we would, all the junior enlisted personnel would stand around and congregate. Oh, the battalion commander is such an idiot. He doesn't realize, all these different things. Well, it occurs to me now that I'm much older that, as delicate as our jobs sometimes were, his job is equally delicate, just on a much larger scale. And so relating that to the teaching that you made, there are things that we've come across in our studies, and even this past Torah cycle, I've heard you say a number of times, we just do that because that's what he says we're supposed to be doing. And it's just, I don't know, I don't really know how to put into words what I'm trying to say, but it's just important for us to have a shalom when we're trusting what he's telling us to do, and just do it, and he's going to make it. He's going to make everything work out for us. So just do the thing.
Amen. All right, Justin. Well, if we were back in medieval times, we'd call you Justin the Just.
That's right. It's okay. I'm adjusting right now.
You're adjusting.
Shalom, Rabbi.
Well played. Well played.
Great Zoom last night, by the way. Went extra long. That was nice. My question is, okay, so you've taught us that, the Spirit brings Scripture to remembrance. When we're reading something and it brings something else to remembrance, and it can't do that, we can't do that unless we've already put it in us.
Correct.
So now we're learning about Shuva and to return. And so my question would be, we are to return, but obviously, what are we returning to? Because in context, returning to something implies that you've been there before.
Right.
So how does that, I guess, take part in returning when obviously this is new to a lot of us, or we're learning every day? I've learned every day that I know nothing every day, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I know you, so knowing that you know nothing is
I know, huh?
not a surprise.
Hey,
okay.
You'll adjust to that.
I will adjust to that, maybe. Okay. So the question's a good question. Look, because you've not been a part of this before, you actually returning in a literal sense is not necessarily possible, because you can't return to something you really weren't doing. But what you've done is you've been grafted into or joined yourself to the group that has to return. Israel returns. Israel has to make the Shuva. It's Shuva Yisra'el. Okay, that's what it says. It's Shuva Yisra'el. You, having become Israel, have to Shuva. Does that now make sense, Justin? Okay? Because obviously, if you're new to this and you have never been raised with any of this and you don't have any family members that, as far as you know, that were ever a part of this, returning to something is not something you would actually be doing, because you'd be returning to your vomit, like the dog metaphor. You wouldn't be returning to the truth, because where you came from wasn't that. But you're joining the group that now has to make teshuvah. Okay? So now you're a part of Israel, and Israel is returning to the old paths. Israel is returning to covenant. Israel is making teshuvah. Did that answer the question? All right, good. Good question. All right.